Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. But today we are talking about Google because they think news is worthless. It's just not making them money. Now, Natasha Lomas of TechCrunch had a really good write-up on this. And here's what's going on, because quite frankly, I think Google is missing the boat, and we'll talk about that. But here's what's happening. Google has just reported the results of an experiment it ran, which removed news from search results for 1% of users for about 2.5 months in 8 different markets across Europe. And they claim that the results show that news is essentially worthless to Google's ad business. And that's the crux of the situation. Google makes their money through ads more than anything else. Now, Google did this test because European copyright laws now require Google to pay news publishers for reusing snippets of their content. So you Google something, basically their AI is going to spit something out, and it's going to be a snippet from an article that they would link to from, let's say, Der Spiegel or France 24 or, whatever, BBC across Europe. So the question then becomes, how much is displaying news actually worth to Google? Google argues that publishers, quote, vastly overestimate, end quote, the value of their journalism to its business per its report of the test. The actual value, quote, could not be statistically distinguished from zero, either overall or by country. So, Google will be hoping to use this outcome basically as leverage in payment negotiations with European publishers. But Google is walking, for the record, a very fine and tricky line, as it's already faced major antitrust fines in France in recent years, basically in relation to news content and its display. In particular, it was fined more than $500 million US over its approach to copyright negotiations with publishers specifically. In Germany, their competition authority has dialed up scrutiny on elements of Google's behavior around news and forced Google to make changes as well. So, any move by Google to try and undercut the effect of the EU copyright laws by claiming news is worthless could essentially end up in front of regulators and put them even in more trouble. So here we are, because Google initially included users in France in the news tests, but abandoned this portion of the experiment after a French court warned that it would be fined for breaking a prior agreement with the antitrust authority. And most notably, Google didn't even run the test in Germany, and Germans love them some news. So here's the thing. I think this position that Google is taking is absolute BS. Some things should not be about money, and let me explain it this way, because I think this is way beyond important for Google to display news. And so let's go through what I was thinking about as I was putting together this piece. So first things first, I think it's a trust and credibility issue, because displaying quality news from reputable publishers reinforces Google's credibility, and therefore it reinforces users' trust. So these snippets from these credible sources can help differentiate accurate information from misinformation or disinformation, which is something Europe and the United States have a huge problem with, and therefore it promotes trustworthiness in search results. You start removing that, and you're getting some crazy news whatever site that has actually no real standards for editorial process or anything else, and that becomes, due to search algorithms, the number one hit. That's a serious problem to Google's credibility in the world. On top of it, and this is my second point, I do think that user engagement and retention is benefited by having this. News snippets drive user engagement, I think, by promoting timely, relevant, and fresh content. And I know, for the record, what the report says. I literally just talked about this, but users, and perhaps not as many as Google would like, which could potentially be millions of users, do frequently visit Google to find breaking news and timely developments. Therefore, it increases overall engagement and retention on Google's platform. I know that when I'm looking up something, did you hear about the news, blah, 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 I'm immediately going to Google search and saying, hey, tell me about XYZ, what is happening in the world today, or what I think I've heard, or something I possibly want to research, such as the notes that I make for these videos, podcasts, and radio segments. So this is an important one. On top of it, and this is a minor point here, I do think it gives Google a bit of a competitive advantage, because if they stop displaying news snippets and all of that, I might shift to Apple News or, God forbid, social media or Bing or something like that. In other words, we are going to be looking for outlets other than Google to find this. And I do use others like Ground News, which I think is very balanced. And I love their bias reports on, articles and publishers and all this kind of stuff. But Google is the quick and easy answer. And I would hate to change that. And I think millions and millions of people out there would agree. Maintaining a robust news display helps Google preserve that competitive position and helps to maintain loyalty, because I would jump ship as many others would. On top of it, I also, and this is my next point, do think that Google brings value to the information ecosystem. Now, obviously, they've been accused of, basically distorting their search algorithms or prioritizing things that they shouldn't. And they do have the ability to manipulate that. But I think by displaying news snippets specifically, not necessarily search results, Google is supporting a more healthy information ecosystem. Publishers essentially rely significantly on basically Google's traffic to their publication sites, their journalism, which then in turn ensures that there's going to be continuous production of reliable and high quality information that is beneficial to Google users like you and I. And I also think, and this is my last point I'm going to make before I get off my soapbox here, is that I do believe that this supports democratic values, keeping news around. High-quality journalism is fundamental to an informed public and a functioning democracy as well. And so by showcasing legitimate news sources, Google contributes positively to those democratic values and society's broader interest in accessible and I think factual information. And if you also look at U.S. laws here, we basically had a law until the early 80s when it was struck down that was essentially a Fairness Act that said, okay, all the major news, or rather all the major networks, on television, ABC, NBC, CBS, et cetera, had to devote, even at their cost, even if it was a no moneymaker whatsoever, had to have news divisions. They had to deliver informed and factual news for basically a certain amount of time every single day, week, and month. And by virtue of that, what you had were the Walter Cronkites of the world, the Ted Koppels of the world, those that took journalism incredibly seriously, that would basically call balls and strikes and deliver black and white news. And obviously you would have opinion commentators and all of that. But when that left, what we've essentially done is see a removal of a lot of that because they're not money makers, or we've seen a degradation into partisan news organizations, and I use the term news lightly there, that aren't necessarily fully informing their audience. They're only informing, let's say, an aspect of a news story to their audience. That's a very serious issue. And cutting through those sources, by ensuring that what you are looking at has been vetted, has basically multiple sets of eyes on it to ensure that it is as accurate as possible, and mistakes are made across the board, but less mistakes are made when sources and information are vetted. This is what we essentially would lose a serious aspect of if Google were to do this. And so if you're with Google, hey Larry, hey Sergey, don't do this. Let me just put it that way, So with that, I'll leave it at that. But I am never a fan when I see potentially good news get pushed to the wayside, because quite frankly, we need it now more than ever. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at Nick AESP. Same with YouTube, where you should subscribe, and hopefully I'll be delivering accurate news all the time. Blue Sky and Mastodon as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private and informed. Take care.